Now let's take a look at conflict. That's the next major narrative element, is the conflict between the protagonist and the antagonist. There, in modern literature, there are different kinds of conflict. Like you can see, it's man versus man, man versus himself, man versus God. That's not really the kind of question I'm asking. I want to be a lot more precise as to what exactly the conflict is in whatever narrative we're looking at. These are the kinds of questions I'm going to suggest you ask yourself when you're reading a story. And the first is, what is the protagonist trying to do? And again, you want to be real specific. We talked about it in character when we were talking about characters. It's not enough to say Jesus is trying to save somebody. You have to ask yourself, what exactly is he doing in these various situations and in general throughout the narrative? And sometimes Jesus is trying to prove himself as God. Sometimes he's trying to hide himself. So you got to really ask and identify what exactly the protagonist is trying to do. Now, the next question that leads from this, and the reason it's really important to have a precise definition or a precise answer to the question of what the protagonist is trying to do, is because it also helps us understand who the antagonist is and how is he trying to stop the protagonist. So who is he and how is he trying to stop him? Sometimes it might not be perfectly obvious who he is. A lot of times it's easy to spot, but sometimes it's not perfectly obvious. And the part we really miss out is how the protagonist or the antagonist is trying to stop the protagonist. This is a really important question because, for example, if the protagonist in the Gospel of John, Jesus, if he's trying to convince the world who he really is, that he's God, and he goes around telling people that he's God, and nobody believes him, or people believe him and they fall away or whatever, the antagonist decides they're going to try and stop Jesus from convincing the world who he is by killing him. And so they put him on the cross and they kill him. Now, it's important to identify real precisely that that's the conflict, because in the end, when you ask, the last question I have here is, how does the protagonist defeat the antagonist? Well, in the Gospel of John, the way Jesus beats the high priest and those who kill him is by getting killed. What he's actually trying to do is prove to people who he is, prove to the world that he's God. The antagonist wants to keep him, we identify the antagonist as the leadership. They want to keep him from proving who he is by killing him, and so they put him on the cross. Well, he resurrects 3 days later, and if there was any doubt as to who he was, that's completely vanished. And it's interesting in the Gospel of John that when people aren't really sure what to believe about Jesus, well, after he resurrects from the dead, the disciples finally really get the big picture and they truly believe. In fact, Nicodemus, who throughout the gospel we're not sure if he believes or not. At the end, he comes out and he's one of the ones who takes Jesus' body, and so we get a positive view of him. But in any case, Jesus defeats the antagonist by dying. And so it's really important to look for the conflict and define it very precisely. So again, the question is, what is the protagonist trying to do? Get a real good definition of that. Then, who is the antagonist? Then ask yourself, what is the antagonist doing to try to stop the protagonist? And come up with a real precise definition. Finally, how does the protagonist defeat the antagonist? And I think that'll give you a really good sense of the conflict. Now, don't be too general, and I've stated this several different ways. So make sure you get a real clear idea of what exactly the conflict is about.